Hello and welcome. This is today's painting. Now, today's video is going to be a little bit longer than usual. It will start off with a tutorial. The tutorial will be how to lighten a sketch for watercolors, how to make a 2D round object look 3D spherical, and after this I will speed up the painting process and I will have a speed painting with a review of the paints that I used, which were the Prima Watercolors Pastel set. So this is my pencil sketch. I just sketched it out with an HB pencil. Now to make this lighter, I'm using a kneaded eraser. I'm just grabbing a fresh, clean surface and I start dabbing it onto the paper. I either dab or wiggle, but I never rub it on the paper. And the reason why I'm doing this is the reason why I'm not using a normal eraser either, because watercolor paper has got a surface which is made for interacting with watercolor in a specific way, and if you were to rub anything on the paper that are abrasive or will disturb the texture, the watercolor will start bleeding, feathering, bleeding through, and it's not what I want, especially not for this piece where I want really nice crisp lines. So I'm just lightening it until I can still see the guidelines, but they're not as solid, and at that point I hope that I will not see them when I'm done with the painting. And I didn't. So yeah, just grab yourself a fresh piece whenever you start noticing that it's not sticky anymore. So at this point my pencil sketch is done and I can start painting. So I'm starting off with wetting the egg that I'm going to paint. And I'm just making sure that I've got all of the edges really nice and crisp. One way of doing this is to have a bead of water and just moving it onto the edges, and when you have all of the edges and all of the center wet, then you can dab off the excess water onto a paper towel or a cloth, and you can have that sheen that you want, because you don't want it to be soaking wet, you just want a general sheen on the paper. And then you just go in with a light wash of that color that you want the egg to be, and you make a decision. This decision will be where will your highlight be. So I've decided that my light source will be sort of in the higher right corner, but I also want it to be towards the middle of the egg. So I'm just using some darker values of the same paint, the same color, and I've got the darkest values in the left bottom edge of the egg, and then also having slightly darker than, so like a mid-tone in around the edges of the top right of the egg. And that is how I continue going. And at this point I'm just making sure that I've got as smooth of a transition from the darker colors to the lighter colors as I can get. Now when you're done with the first egg, you want to make sure that you go in and do another egg which is not next to the egg that you already did. So I decided to go a couple of eggs up and make sure that I am not painting the egg that is right next to a wet egg, because at that point you will get colors going everywhere. It is very mesmerizing to watch, but I wanted all of these eggs to be clean, one color pastel, and just taking one at a time. Another thing you might want to think of when you're doing this is, if you're right-handed like me, you might want to start at the left-hand side of your paper, because if you start off with an egg that is, say, lower to mid right corner, and then you want to do the higher left-hand corner, then you might have to support your hand somewhere, and that somewhere might be in the wet paint. I did that. Not recommendable. So yeah, keep that in mind. If you're right-handed, work left to right. If you're left-handed, work right to left. But yeah, that is the basics of how to paint a spherical-ish object. Now when you're going further down into the lower layers of the eggs, you also have to consider, okay, so my light source is in the top right corner, so I've got an egg which is above it and it's on the top right corner of it, which will then mean that that egg will cast a shadow over the egg that you're doing. So at that point you also have to make the top right hand side of the egg dark as well. So just think about how would light interact with your objects, with your spherical objects, and try to look at reference photos, see where the light falls, and try to replicate that. This is a very good way of getting used to the paint ratios and getting a good handle on control of the paint and the water ratio that you need for different effects. Now, the paints that I'm using here aren't the best for painting 3D objects, I have to confess that, because they don't have the best range of value. Now, this might be because they're pastel, they're not supposed to be very dark. You could go in with a grey and glaze it, but I wanted them to be as clean and as bright as pastels can be, bright colored, and I decided to go for it and just have as saturated as possible color as the shade. Now, the paints I'm using is the Prima Watercolor Pastel Dreams set, and the colors are really beautiful, and the pans kind of look like candy, and it just looks delicious. But what I have noticed is that there's one sort of like a dark pink, which is the pink that I'm using most on here because it's got the best range of values. And there are also two other pinks which are very, very light, and one of them barely shows up on white paper at all. Now, I haven't tried these on dark paper, so they might be brilliant for that because of their opacity, because I like watercolors for their transparency, but these are not transparent, these are opaque. All of these colors are opaque, and I have a feeling that they're more towards a gouache sort of watercolor. But yeah, they are just very chalky when they dry, and they don't get very dark. So it's as if they have the pigment that they wanted the color to be, and then they add very much white. They add a lot of white to make it pastel, and then they just sort of lose the color a bit, I feel like they do. But yeah, they dry very chalky, and this is not a very good paint for glazing. So as I said previously, to get those really dark values, you could do a grey glaze over the shades, the shadows, but that would not work with these paints because they lift. So if you let this whole piece dry, and then you take a paintbrush and you have it slightly moist, and you go on to a darker area of the paint, and then you rub it a little bit, it will lift. It will definitely lift. So I don't particularly like these as much as I do of the paint, but I do like pastel colors, which is I've got such mixed feelings about this palette, but the pastels itself is really good, but I do have to try them out in a on a darker paper, basically, and see if they show up a bit better there. But yeah, there's one specific blue that is showing up really well, and the orange is quite good. The yellow is basically a lemon yellow, and it is also really nice and bright. The purple and the pink that I'm using here, they're brilliant. So you can get a lot of, like half of these are really, really bright colored, but there's like 4 out of 4, no, there's like 6 out of 12 that are not showing up too well on this white paper. There's also 2 different browns in a pastel set, and I'm a bit confused about that, but I suppose it works well for chocolate eggs in this case, so I'm not too mad at it, but yeah. So I'm just working my way through these eggs, and I'm using the ruler to keep it straight, and the cloth to kind of rest my hand on so that I won't get fat from my fingers, my hand, onto the paint, and because it lifts I don't want to smudge it up, which is also a great reason why you should work from left to right if you're a righty. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed painting these. If you do decide to paint one or two or a few or a lot of Easter eggs, then please do tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I will see you in another video.